LeadMe, leading platform from European citizens, industries, academia and policymakers in media accessibility, CA 19142. Cost, European cooperation in science and technology. Audiovisual localization in the age of streaming platforms. Dr. Alejandro Bolaños García-Escribano, University College London, United Kingdom. 5th July 2021. Organization. This seminar is framing the activities of Working Group 2 of the LeadMe Cost Action CA 19142. It has been organized by the collaborative network of early career researchers in audiovisual translation and media accessibility, ColNet, and hosted by Universitat Jaume I, Castelló de la Plana, Spain. LeadMe, ColNet, Universitat Jaume I.
Good afternoon. My name is Irene de Iges. I work at Universitat Jaume I, and it is a pleasure for me to host the third open seminar organized by the collaborative network of early career researchers in audiovisual translation and media accessibility, ColNet. Today, we will have Alejandro Bolaños García-Escribano from University College London to talk about audiovisual localization in the age of streaming platforms. And this activity, this seminar, is also organized by ColNet, but with the support of the Cost Action LeadMe 19142. Which support us with the accessibility of these seminars and the availability of this seminar later on at their website. So it is a pleasure for me to host Alejandro Bolaños. It would be great to have you here at Universitat Jaume I. Well, I'm not at Universitat Jaume I anyway, but well, it would be a pleasure to have you here. But at the same time, it might be difficult to have so many people from so many different countries in the seminar, in the same room. So thank you all for attending. Even if it is 5th of July. Alejandro is lecturer teaching in audiovisual translation at University College London, where he teaches audiovisual translation and Spanish language and culture at both the Center for Translation Studies and the Department of Spanish, Portuguese and Latin American Studies. His latest research revolves around the pedagogical potential of cloud subtitling and explores the latest innovation in audiovisual translation education. And he also works as a freelance translator and subtitler. So Alejandro, the floor is yours. And thank you very much for accepting to be our third speaker.
Well, thank you, Irene, and thanks to the rest of my colleagues from ColNet and the Cost Action for having me. And thank you, everyone, for making the this presentation on a 5th of July of all days, which is supposed to be a public holiday on the other end of the Atlantic. And so I would just like to start my talk asking this simple question. Why this talk? Why today, after such a challenging academic year? Well, I would like to build on some of the research papers that have been published recently, and some of which were saying, well, audiovisual translation has grown by leaps and bounds, as we know, but basically every single AVT publication will start saying how much of a growth we're witnessing. And the fact is that this keeps being so, right? And then there's another paper that I would like to look at, which is by Nikolic and Bywood, published just a few months back, and in which they were saying that viewing habits are changing and that we are consuming more audiovisual products in different media, and especially in streaming platforms. So I just wanted to take stock of all of this see where we are in audiovisual translation and perhaps have a conversation about what is it that we need to know in the industry today. In this paper, they also concluded by saying that there were 6 areas where, people that were surveyed back in 2016 and 2018 agreed on. And 4 of these areas, I think, have gained wider currency nowadays and are highly important in today's landscape, not only at university, but also in the profession. And that would be the fostering of better cooperation between academics and the industry, the transferability of certain skills that we build, that we develop at university, and that then we employ when we become professionals, the standardization and harmonization that are required for the industry to make further advancements, and also the technology, which in this case, well, they mentioned subtitles, but we know that technology is having a much wider impact in other practices. So I'd just like to start just really briefly. What is it that we know, or that we should know, about audiovisual translation? We know that it's different from other translation specialisms because we've got different channels and codes in which meaning is achieved. So the ways in which information pieces of information are conveyed varies, and then the ways in which we localize that information vary accordingly. So if there are some characteristics that we could draft, those would be, well, the existence of channels and signs that we have to take into consideration when we translate, the necessity of using some kind of special software to override the technical limitations, the fact that the subtitler or the translator is part of a broader project and is not working in isolation, it's just one part of the chain. The fact that we are targeting a specific audience, which is quite relevant for certain practices, especially in media accessibility, and the fact that we've got national conventions that we have to abide by. These are, I presume, things that most of you are already quite familiar with. And then we know that there are mainly 2 main modes, umbrella modes, revoicing and subtitling, and then there are media accessibility practices that we take from the different practices that exist. And of course, we know that depending on how we want to convey information, we will be using different sub-practices within audiovisual translation. Okay, but we also know that that's not as easy as it sounds. We also know that come new practices, come new technologies, we've got yet newer practices that we have to deal with, and we translators encounter many more challenges, such as dynamic products and interactive products, where we've got these multimedia programs in which the audience, well, you're given further flexibility. You get to decide how the product looks like, such as Viodie that you see at the top of the screen, or Bandersnatch at the top of the screen. And that, of course, has many implications in the ways in which we translate and localize these programs, right? So it's not as straightforward as it looks. But if we had to kind of sum up and see, okay, what is it that we know about audiovisual translation? There's a wide agreement that the object of study is not solely comprised of texts, but of audiovisual texts, meaning there's a multisemiotic construct, something that goes beyond words. It differs because we've got this multimodal and multimedial construct, this concept. We've got norms, which are often long-standing conventions that are widely used across the industry. And more importantly, we agree that we can never translate a clip without having access to the clip and watching it first. I'm sure that rings many bells to many of you. And we translate and localize the whole clip in its entirety, not only the dialogues. Well, Research also allows us to challenge some of these long-standing ideas. So the first star that you see there, Diacentes and Zarkowska, in their paper said, well, these norms that we have basically embraced for many, many decades, some of them don't have a scientific don't have the scientific evidence needed to continue applying them. So we do need more research, experimental research, to challenge or confirm some of those assumptions. And then there are some other researchers who have found out that there are some times where translators are working in the shadows, right? They don't have access to the clip. They are just translating blindly. Or sometimes you just don't watch the clip in full. You just go one by one, because so subtitle by subtitle, because you're given a template and you've got such a short space of time that there's no way you can practically watch the whole clip before you crack on working. Right, so those are also some of the things that some other researchers have been investigating. So, for instance, templates. So, what has the academic community done about audiovisual translation in recent years? Well, much research has been devoted to technical constraints. So, how limited space with clips affect how we work, how we translate, and how synchronization poses problems to translators, to subtitlers, for instance. And then there's been lots of descriptive research on cultural references and adaptation of clips, linguistic variation, so how do accents play their role in the localization of programs, humor, wordplay, so be it linguistic or extra linguistic, register, etc., etc. These are the so-called research red hot topics that academia has been kind of highlighting for many years. So what is new? Why this paper today? What is new that we should take into consideration? Well, there are many new challenges that we have to factor in. We've got new tools, new technologies, cloud ecosystems that are currently much more widely used, not only by companies, but also by end clients and by freelancers. And there are also there's also a higher number of translation project management tools, some of which are also connected with those cloud tools, so that translators or subtitlers work within the same interface, and we've got what they call this kind of end-to-end translation process, right? So we don't leave the same interface. We've got new practices. We've got re-speaking, which is to be done intralingually. There's now a lot of work being done on interlingual re-speaking, and there's a tendency to embrace machine translation and post-editing, and we will be talking about that, how neural machine translation has made it into the mainstream of audiovisual translation, and how post-editing will be taking a much more important role in the industry, alongside automatic speech recognition, which with ever more present tools that would recognize audio, and that would make the work of subtitlers, for instance, much more seamless. And last but not least, the implications that all of these technologies will have, so the impact that these will have on quality, and also the ways in which we carry out quality control practices, which is, as we will see, being increasingly automated. And this, of course, responds to what is becoming this kind of technological term, this new buzzword in translation studies, this methodological turn where, as a discipline, we are embracing technologies much more, not only in the profession, but also in research, in how we carry out our studies of how the market works. So in the industry, there's of course been a rapid transformation of media consumption, which has gone hand by hand with the evolution of cloud and streaming technologies. If we take a look at just the last 11 years, we see how the market has grown by leaps and bounds, basically. So in just a matter of years, in over a decade, we have moved from the most revolutionary Blu-ray discs at the end of the early noughties to a plethora of streaming platforms that are cohabiting today in the market. And of course, these platforms are having an impact on consumption, on us as consumers of all of those products. If we take a look at this survey, we see, if you take a look at the yellow color there on the bars, the yellow color represents streaming video on demand platforms. So there's been an increasingly sharp growth in how we consume video on demand products as opposed to traditional television. So we're basically consuming more information, more programs on demand than through traditional television. And there's of course the issue of stacking, right? So I don't know about you, but I guess I'm not the only one here in the room who has more than one streaming platform, right? Chances are some of you will have 3, 4, because they give you free trials, or because somebody in your household just happens to have access to a different streaming platform. And then at the end of the day, we've got at least 3 or 4 streaming platforms that we have access to. And this, of course, is increasing the number of programs that are being made available to us on a regular basis. This, of course, is changing our own conception of television consumption. So research on viewing habits has established that newer generations have even less of a commitment to the actual television set than millennials do. So we've got Generation Z, etc., who are coming who are becoming clients and consumers, and they no longer want to watch television. They want to watch whatever they want, whenever they want. Okay, so I forgot to say I will be launching some questions today, some polls, and the first one comes here. Just out of curiosity, okay, this is an anonymous poll. Can I just ask you, how would you define yourself? So if Irene, you're kind enough to launch the first poll, you will see the first question. How would you define yourself?
It should be already there.
Thank you, Irene. So you can either decide whether you're a TV binge watcher, or whether you're an old-fashioned TV viewer, or whether you're a hybrid viewer. So you binge watch some weekends, but then you become a bit old-fashioned and follow normal TV series. Okay, I can see 6, 7 votes.
8 right now.
I can see that there are 5 binge watchers and 6 hybrid viewers, which is more or less what I expected from today. So I think I would consider myself, I would fall under the third category. So sometimes I just binge watch because I really enjoy the series, but then I also like this traditional old-fashioned approach of just watching it whenever it's available, right? But this kind of confirms this new trend that there's a different commitment to viewing consumption. And this was also pointed out by some researchers who were speaking of this Netflix effect. So this Netflix effect means that this growing pervasive impact of technology is basically changing the ways in which we watch television. So it has contributed to all of these changes and these exhibition models. We're now consuming television on demand, and we've also got a curated catalog, and there are people that work on curating those catalogs so that we've got access to what we supposedly want to watch. And I would now like to follow up on a conversation that Esther Bond and Florian Faes had. They are from Slater, and they had this conversation with ex-Netflix executive Chris Fettner, who is now working over in New Zealand with VoiceQ, which are developing some new dubbing technologies. And he said this sentence. He said, "We didn't create." Sorry, that's a typo. "We didn't create tension, but we created attention." And they most definitely did, because they created this Netflix effect. They changed how much television we consume, how we consume it, and many people just don't owe a TV license anymore because they just watch on streaming, they just watch on demand. And this, of course, was responding to some old-fashioned ideas of, episodes being released on a regular basis and not just all of them at the same time. And one of the first experiments, which was discussed in the Languages and the Media conference a while ago now, was this Chelsea program. So they said, okay, we've got all of this community of fan subbers who are producing subtitles, and then they just produce these subtitles, and we can't really keep a pace. We can't keep abreast of their subtitles because we don't have those workflows. So what if we create a new workflow where we ask all of our subtitlers of all different languages to work at the same time, and then we release the program at the same time? So this is what they did with Chelsea, and many other programs followed. And it was I think it was quite successful in the sense that they managed to get hold of expectations, and they managed to basically override this issue that they were having with, fan subbing communities producing translations earlier and distributing things earlier than national distributors. And then came, preferred partners, and then Netflix said, well, we need a platform just to see how good our subtitlers are, because we're just outsourcing all of these materials. We don't have these resources in-house to provide the localization of all our programs. And of course, we need to rely on international vendors. But how do we guarantee that the subtitles that are working for Netflix are the very best? And they said, okay, we are going to create a testing platform, which will consist of different exams, different tests, and then we assign a specific number, and then this person just goes to a preferred partner, gets a contract, and gets work to do. Well, so much for that. Many of you will know that that was a complete disaster, because it was echoed by mainstream media, and then just the platform received an overwhelming number of applicants, and many of whom weren't specialists, didn't have the right training. So it was a bit of a chaos back then. And they moved back to having preferred partners evaluating new subtitlers. And building on what we said about binge watching, I was reading the paper, I think that was 2 weeks ago, and I came across this article. The title is, "We've reached peak binge. Now viewers prefer an old-fashioned weekly hit." And basically this person, I of course carried out a bit of research on this person. So Liam Kelly is, I guess, a millennial. So just a little bit older than I think. And he was saying, we've had enough. So we've been binge watching television during the whole pandemic. We've had enough. We no longer want this Netflix effect. We want the line of duty effect, which in the UK was quite quite a turn a few weeks ago, because it came to an end and everyone was expectant just to see how the series ended. So I don't know if I would very much agree with Liam Kelly on this. I think we've had enough of the pandemic, but I don't think we as a market, we as a society of audiovisual consumers have had enough of binge watching. I don't think that will end in the short run. There's another quote that I took from this interview with Chris Fettner. He said, the only way we can grow is by being in their language. And that I very much agree with, because there's no way Netflix can grow, or any other streaming platforms for that matter, if they don't localize their programs, if they don't reach an international audience. So that's why Netflix, for instance, established their first European production hub back in 2018, and it was in Madrid. They said, okay, we need a headquarter for all of our European productions, and well, it just happened to be in Madrid. And one has to ask oneself, why is that so? Well, of course, it's not because they just want to, you know, give free rein to expenses, or, you know, to their spendings. It's just because the European Union approved a content quota for streaming services. So 30% of the content that is being streamed by all of these OTT and VOD providers has to be European. Okay, European understood also as UK produced, which was also another dilemma, so as to speak, because the UK is no longer part of the European Union, but in terms of quotas, in terms of content, it still qualifies as European, as you know, regionally European. So there's plenty of content on Netflix that is still in English, produced in Britain, in Great Britain. What we also know is that Netflix has taken the lead in European scripted content. So if you take a look at the 2019 figures, we saw that Netflix was one of the top 5 commissioners of new European scripted TV shows. Well, look at that growth. Look how it increased. It just jumped from 43 to 72 in just 1 year. And of course, this growth is, I expect it to be even greater with all of these new productions that they're funding. There was another quote that I found particularly interesting. And he said, and I think we can very much agree with this, translation is a commodity. So if we conceive translation as a commodity, something that we necessarily have to pay to reach a global audience, then companies will try to cut corners, will have the financial imposition of cutting down on spending. So he said, well, from the point of view of Netflix, so referring to common strategies adopted by preferred vendors, they said, we'll reduce the quality and cost until it becomes painful, and we get some signal that we've gone too far, and we correct. And this, we know, has happened with some companies which basically went for machine translation with no post-editing or no quality control, and it was, of course, a major failure. So here comes the question of risk versus cost optimization. How do I make money without a high risk, without compromising quality and having audiences coming back to me and saying, we don't like your programs, there's no way we can watch them. But coming back to video on demand platforms, if we come back to Netflix and we go back a few years, we see that initially they were only localizing programs into English, Spanish, and Portuguese, depending on the source language. And they soon grew to localizing into more than 20 languages. And Lobato back then said that most of the subtitles were supplied by right holders, although I don't very much agree with that. I think it very much depends on each distribution company. But for originals, and that I very much agree with, the company had to produce their own subtitles. So what does that mean? That means lots of work. And that's why if we take a look at the media localization data from the market, the media localization market, we see that it's an industry where there's plenty of money. And we see that for OTT platforms, but also pay TV could count towards this VOD quota, we've got a very high percentage of programs that need to be localized. And the Europe, Middle East, and Africa Association market, well, they've made a forecast of an increase of 5 to 8% in the amount of income that this media localization industry would produce in just a matter of years. So in 3 years, from 2018 to 2021. And of course, we've got pandemic permitting, right? So we've got a whole pandemic, and many people were a bit concerned, especially freelancers who basically were evidently very afraid that they would get fewer commissions and that translation rates would be frozen, if not reduced. But NIMSI, in their latest report, they said that all of these worries were greatly exaggerated, and that the growth of the industry, of the language industry in general, is still there, and there's a big growth, and we've got a big share of the market in media localization. Back in 2017, with all of these video on demand platforms coming up, we saw that there was a higher there was a greater demand of translators. And 2017 also coincided with the time when Netflix started revoicing and doing English dubbing, English mainstream dubbing. So that's time-wise, it's coincidental. And the problem is that, as Aiden Estopasi said, there was also a talent crunch. So we've got plenty of European countries, for instance, where there's plenty of translator training programs, but then we have many countries where there's not where there aren't enough translator training programs, and there's no way we can fill in the needs of the market. There aren't enough trained audiovisual translators out there. Or to put it in a different way, there are enough of certain language combinations, but there aren't enough translators in less popular language directionalities. And if we take a look at a normal workflow, the role of a subtitler, for instance, is limited to just these 2 steps, okay? This is a bit how the workflow would look like when we localize a program. So the subtitler would just jump in on those 2 steps. Well, subtitling the media and returning the files via email or a translation project management platform, and or carrying out the quality control of the subtitles. So what about the rest? Well, for the rest, we've got plenty of work that has to do with linguists and project management, but which doesn't necessarily involve a language component. Now, Back in 2019, when analyzing Netflix, Lobato said that the translation was still done by humans, though the company was very keen to standardize this work. And what do they mean by standardize? Well, if we then move to 2020, there was an article that was published by several researchers, one of whom happens to be from Netflix. And the title of their paper was Simplify Then Translate. Automatic pre-processing for black box translation. This looks a bit obscure, but if we look into the paper, what they're looking at doing is this standardization, namely machine translation, and automating the whole process and bringing forward more technologies that would allow for a more seamless workflow. We've also got other news. We've got these new lip sync technologies that they say could change dubbing because they reanimate the entire faces of target actors. That would mean that dialogue writing would have a lesser importance if we apply those technologies. And then there was also another article in 2021, so that's another typo, excuse me. And this paper reads, detecting over or under translation errors for determining adequacy in human translations. And they come from Amazon. So what is it that they're doing? Whereas in Netflix, they were looking at incorporating technologies to produce these translations. In Amazon, they're looking at incorporating technologies to make quality control semi-automatic. So they're basically devising ways in which they can assess our work, so human work, through an algorithm and establish which subtitles have a good quality or not, and those that don't. And then there are some subtitling platforms, some of them which are being made available to the public, which are incorporating machine translation systems. And there are some of them which are looking at AppTech and some others which are looking at Amazon. And if you want to know more about these engines, you can take a look at this article by Damian Santilli published in April on LinkedIn. Should be a fairly easy search on Google. But if you ask me, as a subtitler myself, for me, recently, the post-editing of machine generated subtitles looks a bit like this. Well, I think you get the gist, right? And there are other subtitlers that are saying, you know, on social media, that some subtitlers are just charging too little because many companies are imposing these extremely low subtitling rates. And they're saying, we're not fast food restaurants, we make steak, right? So if you're a good subtitler and you produce good quality subtitles, then you should be charging more. You should be having a very decent rate. And coming back to these machine-generated subtitles, we of course have to take into consideration translation quality, because in my experience, when I've been teaching machine translation for subtitles and post-editing, what I've encountered is that my students will spend twice as much post-editing those subtitles. And I'm not saying that these systems can't get better over time. I'm not saying that. I'm saying as it stands, it still looks a bit all right. And the good thing is we've got these multidimensional quality metrics, because that's how our work as translators is being assessed. So many of these companies, if you work as a subtitler for a preferred vendor, they will have different ways in which they will be assessing your work. So one way for us to defend our work and to say this is high quality human produced subtitling work is by proving that we know what are the metrics for translation quality and making sure those subtitles are as good as possible. Now, there are other there's more innovation down the line, and I was preparing these slides the other day when I came across this new TTAL, which is an acronym that Netflix is using for it's a new system for them to basically streamline subtitling and dubbing, because that's also one of the things that we've been struggling with as an industry. So making both dubbing and subtitling more homogeneous. Sometimes moving from the dubbing to the subtitling wasn't completely direct or straightforward, and sometimes the subtitling would have to be done from scratch. This is something that they're also looking at with technologies and looking at scripting. Now, all of these technologies that I've been mentioning have plenty to do with cloud systems. We've switched in the last decade, but especially in the last few years, from desktop-based software to cloud-based ecosystems. I remember when I was asking subtitling trainers back in 2016 whether they knew whether they used any cloud-based subtitling platforms in their subtitling courses. Most of them, 15 out of 17, said no, they weren't using any cloud-based platforms. And then when I did research between 2017 and 2019 with the students, as you can see, not even 20 students out of 240 had used any cloud-based platforms at all. So that's my second and third question to you. So hopefully, Irene, if you're kind enough to launch the third question.
The third one or the second one?
The third one. Sorry, the second one.
Sorry, because it's launch.
So my second question to you is, have you ever heard of any cloud-based subtitling systems? And this can be proprietary, such as Deluxe One or iMedia Trans or Netflix Originator. They can also be commercial, so Una tools, for instance, or they can be of any other kind. Have you ever come across any of those? Okay, so that's quite representative. 11 out of 13, 11 have come across these cloud-based systems. So as you can see, this confirms that in the last few years, we've come across much more often with these platforms. And Irene, if you're kind enough to launch the third question.
Launch.
Which is, thank you. Which is, okay, you've heard of them, but have you used them? Perhaps you have used, there should be one that is yes, some of them, but try to click on the ones that you have used the most. So proprietary, that means for Netflix or any preferred vendor. Commercial, so a cloud-based platform such as Una with a license. Freeware, Amara, YouTube Studio, you don't pay. Which ones have you used? Okay, so only 4 of you haven't used them, whereas 5 of you have used freeware, 3 of you commercial, so I guess Una tools because it's one of the few options available, although there are other companies that are looking at commercial tools as well, and proprietary for some of you who are working in the industry. Okay, that's more representative, I think, of the 2021 landscape. Well, if we take a look at this chart, I've just used a blue square for all of the tools, audiovisual translation tools, that are currently available on the cloud. So I'm pretty sure the landscape looks quite different to what it did a few years back. But nowadays, 2021, all of those project management tools, dubbing editors and subtitling editors are working exclusively or partially on the cloud. So that's how we see where the market is going. And I would like to draw on yet another quote from Chris Fettner. He said, "That's one of the superpowers that Netflix always had, its incredible insight into the viewer consumption model." And he was referring to consumption and abandonment data. Of course, Netflix and the likes of Netflix or other video on demand platforms, they're gathering plenty of data of how we consume their programs. They know what we watch, how we watch it, whether we finish TV series or not, what is it that we like, what are we using our thumbs up for, etc. And something that they've realized is that Netflix, well, for Netflix, English is no longer the primary viewing language. The number of users that are non-US based has grown, as you see on the chart, exponentially. We've got 73 well, I think that's million users that are not in the US, and many of them, most of them, are not native English speakers. And on the other hand, we've got the dubbing revolution, because research at Netflix has also allowed us to understand that whenever we watch programs in our language, we are more prone to finishing that TV series, right? And Netflix has chiefly become a playground, a linguistic playground, because they've basically taken stock of the dubbing that has been done in other languages, and they're now doing plenty of dubbing into English. This dubbing is becoming more mainstream. But there are some researchers, like my colleague Lydia Hayes, who are looking at how linguistic variation affects programs, the dubbing of programs. So, for instance, she's been looking at how domesticating or foreignizing accents have been used in different programs in English. Why? Because English dubbing has been eminently characterized by video game speech, video game dubbing, whereas now studios are becoming more eager to do just a different approach. Why? Of course, because the audiences are not welcoming those dubs. And let me just throw some data to you. So my colleague Lydia Hayes and I, we've recently built a corpus of Castilian Spanish films and series that are being distributed on Netflix, both in Ireland and in the UK. And we finished our corpus last week, so this is quite recent. And we found out that there's a total of 82 programs, again, Castilian Spanish only, so Peninsular Spanish, which comprises of 54 films and 28 TV series. So we set out to see how many of those were dubbed. Well, as it turns out, 26 films have been dubbed in English, and 23 TV series have been dubbed into English. Then we looked at the different dubbing strategies, because this, of course, is confirming one trend, which is Netflix is going towards more dubbing, mainstream dubbing in English. But we also wanted to know what are the strategies. And we found out that most of the dubbings had followed a standardizing approach. And most of them were done in the US, so in Los Angeles, whereas some of them were done in Canada. And whereas for TV series, the ones that were domesticated, so using local regional accents in English, were from Britain. And I think we can agree also that in the UK we're quite reluctant to see foreignized accents, right, or standardized accents. And this, of course, has to do with, again, what the clients say. Because back in 2019, Netflix had to basically redub some of the series, or at least one, which was Money Heist, La Casa de Papel, one of the main Spanish TV series that is being distributed by Netflix. They realized that the audience didn't like the dubbing. They said it sounded too standardized, it sounded too artificial, and that they wanted something that sounded less dubbing. So are we witnessing a new wave of domesticating practices like, we had in Spain a few years back? Time will tell. So what's on the horizon? And I'm just wrapping up here. So we've got new viewing habits. So even though I mentioned binge watching and hybrid viewing habits, I think we can agree that there will be more with newer generations. Further automation, so integrating artificial intelligence like what we saw with lip sync and artificial lip syncing, automatic speech recognition combined with neural machine translation. And then we see this guy trying to amend the errors. So that's, I think, what we have in the short run. So hopefully in the long run, they will work better. And particularly in cloud systems, as I also mentioned. So more post-editing and more quality control. So for any translator trainers in the room, that's something that we certainly need to incorporate and to do more in the classroom, and more mainstream dubbing in English, some of which is being done remotely, especially due to the pandemic. So new cloud systems being devised for voice talents to work from home. And I'm very conscious of time. And one of my questions for you was, so what did I miss? I've just tried to bring you this, I think, quite comprehensive landscape of things that are going on in the localization industry. And now it's over to you. What do you think? What have I missed? And have you got any questions?
Thank you, Alejandro. There was a comment by Julieta Cabrera when you were mentioning TV binge, so binge watching and so on. And she mentioned, and I said I will comment on that when we got to questions. So if you don't mind, we'll start with that. She mentioned that Netflix is going back to the old practices, releasing weekly episodes of certain series instead of entire seasons. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it goes in line with what I mentioned about this article from the Times, that some people have had enough of binge watching. And Netflix is definitely looking at how clients respond, how they perceive their strategies. Some TV series are still being released in batches or in bulk, but in all fairness, if you've got some examples of those series, because I personally haven't seen those series, being an example of a series that is now releasing on a weekly basis, those episodes. But it wouldn't surprise me, just because, as I said, they look at the data, they look at how people engage or disengage with their programs, and they act accordingly, and they act very promptly. They're quite fast at making those changes. As you've seen, we've changed or we've witnessed so many changes in just a few years. I think Luis Miguel's series last season was released like that. Okay, good to know. Good to know.
I was reading. So I was mentioning that if anyone has any other questions, so Blanca, you can be the first one.
Thank you, Alejandro. I learned a lot from this presentation and I made a lot of notes. If I have to answer your question, I would say that you didn't miss anything. So at least I can tell what you missed. So really thank you for such an inspiring seminar. And my question is regarding this corpus that you mentioned, you've compiled with Lydia Hayes. Is this available for other researchers to look at, or are you already planning to publish something that we can consult now? Because I think there's lots of data there that we may want to have a look at. Thanks.
We're trying, Blanca. Thank you so much for your kind words. And this is something
for organizing this.
And so Blanca, yes, we're hopefully we will be able to share these figures hopefully after the summer. So we're looking at publishing this data as soon as possible, because we are very much aware that things change swiftly. And that's why I said we collated this corpus up to the 29th of June, because I'm pretty sure that in just 1 week, there's been changes, because there are some series that suddenly disappear. There are some others that suddenly appear. And but what we know for sure is that Netflix started dubbing into English back in 2017, and there are only a few series that are backdated. So most TV series date from 2017 onwards, and just a couple of them were released in Spanish television and then were redubbed, whereas films, almost no film made it to the mainstream dubbing if they were released before 2017.
And just a tiny back question. Well, I need to no. Let me come back later. I need to think about the question. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Blanca. And it would be very much I will also be very much interested in those figures, because this dubbing into dialects is quite a new thing, or I mean, it might be interesting to see what they're doing. Said also had a question, so please, Said.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much, Alejandro, for this wonderful presentation. This is Said. I guess some of you may know me from audio translation literature. I guess I missed something in your presentation, so my apology. Is the question sound less scholarly? You mentioned that Netflix is putting some efforts to make its dub products look and sound less dubby. I didn't get the very concept of less dubby. Can you elaborate more on this very concept? I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Netflix, well, let's come back to the basics. So English dubbing. The mainstream English dubbing has traditionally been video games, cartoons, so animation, perhaps some corporate videos, but mainly video games and animation. So what this means is that most of the voice actors came from this video game background and had this kind of standard accent and standard variety that they would apply to their diction, to their basically to their performance. And what was found out was that La Casa de Papel, Money Heist, was dubbed in a standard variety. So there was no flavor. There was no local, regional Spanish flavor, whereas there are other series that have used foreignizing approaches. They have used Hispanic, Chicano, or other kind of Latin American voice actors who happen to be in Los Angeles and added a bit of a foreign accent to their series. And then there's the UK landscape, where, as you may know, here in the UK, whenever they dub, also for newsreels, etc., they always add this kind of domesticating approach, domesticating accent. Well, it was found out through research and through the reception of the series that viewers wanted a more domestic version. So if you take a look at La Casa de Papel, there was a dubbing done back in 2017, and they redubbed the whole 2 seasons, the first 2 seasons, in 2019, so that it was made more similar to the 3rd season, that they dubbed in a more colorful, playful variety. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was a very insightful presentation. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good, thank you very much. Any other question? Well, Blanca, you can have your tiny back question for the moment.
Okay, thanks. No, I just needed like to rephrase it in my head. This corpus that you mentioned, what kind of material did you gather? Was it a multimodal corpus with the video and then you tagged it, or is it just linguistic? Well, just, it's a lot of work if it's linguistic, but just to know. Thanks.
No, I mean, it's just 2 of us, so that would be
that's a key point, yes.
That would be a humongous thing to do. No, what I mean is we've taken stock of what has been done, and we've established a set of criteria. So some of the criteria would be year of release, original production, directors, so dubbing directors, which dubbing studio did the dubbing, so whether it was in Los Angeles, London. We've also got a few in Europe and Canada as well. We've got some Scandinavian countries which have done the dubbing of some TV series, although some of them, so not mainly for Castilian Spanish, but yet they're quite representative. And my colleague Lydia and I have been looking at how accents were conveyed. So we wouldn't go as far as saying there are 5 characters who speak X and there are 6 characters who speak Y. We would just look at it quite holistically and see what was the main approach, because what we found out was that the dubbing studio would take one main approach, and they would say, so we found out, for instance, that for some series, younger generations would have a standard American accent, whereas older generations would have a foreign accent, like Hispanic accent. And this would be, the series, I can't remember the title now, I can tell you later, but the one with Carmen Maura, it's a mini series with Carmen Maura. So she had a very thick Hispanic accent, and 20-year-old characters would speak in, fluent American standard accent.
That's very interesting. Thanks. Thank you both.
Very interesting. Also because some of the stories will be set in Spain, for example, and no migrants would be applied. So that would be very much different from the research I undertook. Well, any other question? I would like to, so if you don't mind, we might finish the seminar. I would like to thank Alejandro for this very, very interesting presentation and for sharing even this recent research. And I wish you all the luck with it. And again, I thank all attendants, all participants for sharing this afternoon with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, this seminar will be later made accessible and will be available at the Cost Action Lead Me website. So we might probably inform you all when it is published. So once again, thank you. And I wish you a very happy and hopefully restful summer.
Thank you all for making it till the end. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
COST, European Cooperation in Science and Technology. This video is based upon work from Cost Action LeadMe CA 19142, supported by COST, European Cooperation in Science and Technology. COST, European Cooperation in Science and Technology, is a funding agency for research and innovation networks. Our actions help connect research initiatives across Europe and enable scientists to grow their ideas by sharing them with their peers. This boosts their research, career, and innovation. www.cost.eu. This work is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution, CC BY, funded by the Horizon 2020 Framework Programme of the European Union.